What's going on, you guys? It is Kojin here, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about stat pools. So in LaTale, there's a lot of stats that really aren't truly explained. So I'm going to go ahead and try my best here to try and make it a little bit more simple for most people, and so that way that you can understand which ones are the most prioritized and which ones are not. So let's get into it. First off, we've got strength and magic. These are pretty much the two base modifiers for all the classes in the game. Either your class is going to use strength as its natural stat, or it's going to use magic. There's not like extra stats like charisma or dexterity or anything like that where you need to constantly stack it to do damage. Every class either is based off of strength or magic, so just keep that in mind. So you will never hear anybody say that, there's a stamina based class. This used to be a thing, but no longer is it a thing. And happily, I'm excited for that too, because really stacking stamina back in the day was so much easier, in my opinion, than stacking strength and magic. So a lot of people had like 40k HP back in season 2 and stuff like that, and then they were still lacking strength and stuff like that. So let's just kind of get over that hump. Next up, we've got stamina. Stamina increases your max HP and defense, but not only that, the more that you get, you can honestly still stack maximum HP and defense as a part of their own singular stat. So don't just think that, I need stamina. You can also just enchant max HP or defense. Luck. Luck pretty much is almost useless. In my opinion, the more luck you have, it's really based more off of your option rate. Luck typically is not a stat that's stacked very often in this game, simply because crit rate is one of those stats that a lot of people not a lot of people, but the GMs tend to give out quite frequently at 100%. So most of the time you won't even need critical rate or luck majority of the time. It's just in those down times through events you have to really worry about crit rate. So it doesn't really happen too often. Like normally when they're in between events, it's like 2 or 3 weeks, and then they'll drop another event. HP. HP is probably one of the most important stats in the game. Typically, the more HP you have, the less likely you are to get KB'd in a certain dungeon. So for example, like let's take Theater Yugamon for example. You probably will need like anywhere between 7 to 8 mil just to keep yourself from getting knocked back in easy mode. And from there, pretty much, you will find that the game actually scales a lot of like dungeon difficulty off of HP. So the more HP that you have, the more likely you are to be better off. Next up is SP. SP, a lot of classes don't really use, but pretty much it's just what classes use to cast their skills. But over time, a lot of these skills no longer require SP, so you won't really see a lot of classes use this. You might see certain magic classes, like for example Archmage, use it for their mana shield and things of that nature. But typically the SP is just for mana skills in general, so mostly for magic classes. Next up is the attack range. Attack range in itself is for physical classes only. This is pretty much the counterpart to intensity for elemental classes or magic classes. So pretty much in general, intensity and attack are the same exact thing, but pretty much this is what's going to define the range of what your attacks hit while you're attacking. Nothing too complicated here. Just know that there's a minimum and a maximum of the stat, but right now, because I have no items on, my minimum stat is actually higher than my maximum stat. But in general, you will find this always being the case, as because of the survival instinct skill. Whenever you use that, it'll boost your minimum attack range way up, so that way that you're hitting way harder and at a flat consistent rate. Long story short, attack range is important, but just know that your minimum attack rate will probably almost always be higher than your maximum attack rate. But it's always important to enchant items with better maximum enchant rate. The higher your maximum enchant rate is, the higher and the harder your survival instinct skills will hit while you're in survival instinct. Next up, we've got defense. Defense is pretty much just like a I wouldn't necessarily say a loose term anymore, because really in general, no matter how much defense you have, if you hit the right amount of mobs, or if you jump into a mob stack when it gets to the harder part of the game, 9 times out of 10 you're going to die regardless. So I wouldn't say that defense is to help you survive, but defense really does help out in the overall scheme of things when it comes to you taking certain amounts of damage. Next up, we've got resistance. Resistance is for those elemental attackers, typically like your flying mobs, or like mobs that are in special situations. They'll be like, they'll attack using like elemental attacks. So you'll end up having to stack up elemental resistance. It's not super important, but just know that naturally you'll already have enough elemental resistance to deal with a lot of enemies. So you don't really need to worry about stacking this. But for example, attack and intensity, you'll have to worry about stacking. Defense, you won't really have to worry about stacking. Either your class is just naturally going to be good at these things, or they're just naturally not going to have it. Next up, we have got accuracy. Accuracy is super important to this game. Literally, at end game, you will at least need 500 accuracy at a bare minimum to continue to hit the monsters. Going into the EXP dungeons, you will need at least 300 EXP or 300 accuracy to get to what you're looking for here. Obviously, there's physical and magical accuracy, but typically most enchants in the game are dual accuracy enchants, and just about anything in this section will come out dual. Evasion, you don't really have to worry about much, but obviously the higher your evasion, the less likely an enemy is to hit you. Typically this stat is not super stackable, but you can enchant it on certain pieces. So if you're looking for evasion, definitely can go for it here. Critical rate. Critical rate, again, also one of those enchant stats that are dual chance. Typically, once you hit about 50 critical rate, you don't really need to worry too much about going forward with it. In general, a lot of this stat in general is just given away through events and stuff of that nature, and they'll give you like a 30-minute 100% crit rate pot, and they'll give you like 5 of them a day or something like that, depending on your login events, your EP events, and what they will give you throughout your season pass and things of that nature. So just keep that in mind too. Next up is critical damage. Critical damage is literally the most important stat in this game, offensively. Critical damage is pretty much just a modifier for critical hits. So every time that you hit critically in the game, your stat is going to be modified by this number, and then you'll be hitting pretty much what the math equivalent is of this stat. It's huge. Again, like for example, if you're playing a strength class, strength, attack, and critical damage typically are the stats that you're going to be looking for overall. And then these next two here, minimum damage and maximum damage. Minimum damage, a lot of people do not stack this simply because of survival instinct. For those of you guys who don't know what survival instinct is that once you complete your Legend 2 quest, you will get a skill called survival instinct, which will increase your minimum attack range by 3,000, and I believe it gives you like movement speed or something like that. I got it right here. So yeah, it'll increase your minimum damage by 2,000, your minimum attack range by 2,000, and it'll give you 100 movement speed. So just keep that in mind while you're using this skill, that you will overall just find yourself dealing with a lot of that in general. Minimum damage, one of those stats that a lot of people don't stack in general. As you can see here, minimum damage will pretty much stay at a minuscule point. A lot of people don't even enchant this on their weapons anymore. People really prefer maximum damage and accuracy. So just in general, you'll find a lot of that coming out. Don't worry too much about the minimum damage. Most people will worry about maximum damage, because the more maximum damage you have, just like with maximum attack range, you will find yourself in general needing to stack these two to make survival instinct even stronger. So pretty much in general, just keep that in mind, that when you're going for attack range, it's not like minimum attack range and maximum attack range. It'll just be a stat called attack. Like for example, it'll say attack plus 70, and it'll give you plus 70 minimum and plus 70 maximum attack range. Just keep that in mind. From a very simplistic point, because obviously there's percentages and stuff like that that go into it, so we're not going to get too crazy with the math, but just in general, just trying to prioritize each stat as to which ones are the most important. Next up, we've got defense penetration, also known as TDD. I will probably call it TDD because I am an old LaTale player. So typically TDD is defense penetration. Pretty much the higher this number is, the more damage you will hit overall on their mobs. So for example, in a simplistic term, let's say that my damage defense penetration is 60%. Pretty much I'll be hitting 60% of my damage effort values on mobs. So the higher this number is, and it only goes up to 99, you cannot hit 100% of your damage on a mob. It's just against the game rules. It is what it is. So just keep that in mind, that this number is probably one of the most important numbers early game, and by the time that you hit in the mid game, if you're not at least, let's say, 95 TDD, you're going to start to have some issues with damage fluctuations, and especially against bosses. So highly important for early and mid game, and by the time that you hit in game, you need to at least have 97 TDD, but most of them will not accept anything less than 98 or 99. Just keeping that in your mind in general. So TDD super important. You can enchant this on like gem sets, your red gems in specific. You can enchant TDD on. Let me see, what else can you enchant TDD with? Some items obviously come naturally with TDD, and you can do like your charm. Your charm gives you TDD, and I know there's a few other items that you can enchant TDD on. So over time, like, you'll realize that, oh, I just need to enchant this on to certain set items to get it to 99. It's super simple. Just as long as you have the best in slot item, then you have to worry about enchanting to 999 or 99, excuse me. Back attack damage, really this is not super important, but for certain classes it's more beneficial than others. So for classes that are high mobility, you probably want to have some back attack damage, but just know in general this stat is not really one of those stacked skills. Pretty much what back attack damage does is that if you're behind the enemy and you attack them and they're facing the other direction, you will get like a little small damage multiplier. Nothing crazy. But just know that for certain classes, like for example Judgment, where you're constantly moving around and you have bleed skills, it kind of does come a little bit more in handy. So you might want to stack a little bit more of that, but in general you don't really need to. Next up, static damage. We had an actual very huge debate about this back in season 2. I honestly don't want to get too much into it. All I really know is that static damage is a very low effort value stat, excuse me. So a lot of people don't really want to get too crazy into it. I don't want to get too crazy into it because I personally do not know the whole deal behind it. But in general, I do like the idea of having just pretty much another base stat. It's very similar to strength in Magic. That's all I can really say about that. Next up, we've got damage mitigation. Damage mitigation is so important when it comes to your defenses in the game. So pretty much damage mitigation is like TDD, but for your character. Like, when you're getting hit from monsters, this is your version of TDD for you. So pretty much monsters, based off of your damage mitigation, will hit you for a certain amount. So for example, let's say that I only had no damage mitigation and the monsters hit for 1,000,000 damage each. But now that I have 6,000 damage mitigation, they're only going to hit me for, like, let's say anywhere between 800k to like 900k, for example. Damage mitigation, super huge. The more that you have of it, the better. You can get a lot of this through your awakening skills and also through the ascension levels ups here. You can get a lot of it from these items in specific too. So just keep that in mind. Definitely something you want to look out for. Next up, we have normal added damage and boss added damage. These are your mobbing and bossing stats. In general, you won't really find a lot of this at the beginning of the game. Typically, until you hit in-game, these stats in general just don't really entirely matter. But just know by the time that you get to the, I'd say right around Kairos time, you'll start to realize how important these stats are, because once you get to a higher level of TDD, this is pretty much what's going to break that TDD mark overall. So the damage amplification will in general be in percentages, and then you will get a stat number, and then you will get a total in general. So just keep that in mind, that pretty much in order for you to get past that 99% TDD mark, you will need boss and normal added damage to continue to do even more damage on the bosses and mobs. Huge deal, absolutely huge. Next up, we've got cooldown reduction. Cooldown reduction is huge in general. Pretty much the more cooldown reduction you have, the more that your skills in general you'll be able to spam. So just keep that in mind, nothing too crazy. The higher it is, the better. Typically on average at in-game, you'll have about 45 to 50 cooldown reduction. Some classes are a little bit more because they get a little bit more, but in general, right around end-game, you'll find anywhere between 40 to 50 cooldown reduction on an end-game character. Super normal. Next up is EXP gain rate. EXP gain rate in general, I know that a lot of people won't even see numbers like this. A lot of people probably won't even understand how this works. But if you're an old school or a seasoned or a veteran player, you will know that in general, in this version of the game, it's a lot more given than it was in previous versions of LaTale. So like in season 1 OG Planet, or even in early Papaya, you would probably see 2000 EXP gain rate and you'd be like, that's crazy. But nowadays people are typically getting like double this, triple this sometimes, depending on what you stack and what events you show up to. Most of this is going to be consumable items that you find in the game, but also you can get EXP gain rate through memorials, pet potentials, and a few other things in the game too. You'll see at an end game rate, some people will be like 7,000, maybe even 6,000 EXP gain rate, even more than that. I've seen some people, you know, hit anywhere between 8,000 more, depending on what events and what stuff they have taken in place. Some people will save up stuff from previous events for months just so that they can stack to get to this number, and then, you know, they'll show it off or whatever. Super awesome, great stat. But just know, in general, as you're leveling up, you might see anywhere between like 4,000 to 5,000, because the burning potion actually gives you like 2,000 EXP gain rate, I believe. So super beneficial stat in general. Item drop rate. Item drop rate is huge. Pretty much every time that you get an item in the game, item drop rate is responsible for it. Item drop rate in itself, I would say the higher this number is, and it caps out at 1,000, the higher this number is, the more items you will get per dungeon, or just from drops in general. So like if a monster you know, drops an item that you need, chances are item drop rate will pretty much guarantee you a drop once you're up that high. But typically on average, most people are about 500%, which pretty much is about a 50% chance for the item to drop that you're looking for. Option rate, I will say option rate pretty much determines the options that you get onto your gear. Beforehand, I would say that this is probably just one of those stats that you really don't need to worry too much about, because the game will give you this naturally over time. And then you have Richening, the summonable, who will also help boost your option rate as well. But typically, the more option rate you have, the better options that you get on gear, and the more options you get on gear. But right now with the meta, more options in itself pretty much just give you, well, every item and armored piece drops with 3 or 4 options already on it. So like if you're going for anything of that nature, you'll definitely find that out pretty quickly. LE gain rate, I've already made a video on this, and there's a ton of them out there. But typically, in general, LE gain rate is pretty much a modifier for how much LE you get per monster. So the higher this number is, the more monster LE rate you'll get per monster. Quest reward, same thing. Pretty much the higher your quest reward number is, the higher the rewards like EXP and LE that you get from quests and GP. It will all be modified based on this number. So for example, I have 500% quest reward right now. If I went and I complete a quest that had 100, that gave me 100 guild points, I would actually get 600 guild points because I have an extra 500 quest reward. Every 100 quest reward that you have pretty much means double the amount that you're going to be getting from the quests that you turn in. Super huge, definitely a big deal for leveling up and going through the EXP dungeons, because every EXP dungeon comes with a set of quests too, and once you complete those quests, you pretty much get a modified amount of EXP, GP, and other things too, based upon quest reward. The only thing that's not modified is the actual items that you get from monster quest. So for example, like if you get an EXP potion from a quest, you won't get 5 extra EXP pots, you'll just still get the 1. And last but not least, movement speed. Movement speed is huge. At first, you won't really find yourself with a lot of movement speed. Honestly, the beginning of the game is super slow. But in general, it's honestly really cool to see. And I'm happy to see that it's in the game too. Pretty much the higher your movement speed stat is, the faster you move. I don't know the exact metrics of it, but just in general, know that that's the case. But anyways, you guys, hopefully that breaks down a lot of the stats here. I'm also going to be sure to prioritize and put which stats belong where, and which stats are the most important, starting from beginning game, working yourself into end game. So thank you guys for watching, and I'm going to go ahead and also put like detailed labelings and stuff like that on there too, so that way you kind of understand the stat a bit more. Thank you guys so much, and I will definitely see you on the next one. Peace.